Well, hello there, and welcome back to Stories by Will. I am your host, Will, and we are going to continue reading through the book, The Tales Told in Holland. So, this next section is the story of the glorious, joyous, and heroic adventures up till Ulenspiege. Now, this particular story actually consists of six different stories. So, I'm going to break this up into three different parts. And today we're going to get stories one and two. So story one is going to be Till the Clown, and the second one will be, I believe it's Till and Richard II of Spain, and that's what we're going to go through. And what's really interesting is this particular character throughout the years of Holland has a lot of Phil cat hair. Sorry, has a lot of different morals and ethics in which they contribute to this character. So I would really love to hear some of your feedback if you pick up any of the morals or ethics through the story. Tell me what you saw. We can have a conversation about it if you want to. And if you're watching this right now, please like and subscribe. Help me grow this channel because I seriously need to get some teeth back in this mouth a little bit. So let's begin. Story number one: The glorious, joyous, and heroic adventures of Tile Ulenspiege. Till the Clown. Till Ulenspiege was a jolly fellow, a master of pranks and merry words. He wandered about the countryside to fairs and markets, praising what was good and beautiful and making sport of vanity and conceit. Whenever market day came about in Middleburg or the Burges, there were shoemakers and tailors, each in a separate stall. There were mise avengers from Antwerp, they that snare tomtits at night with the aid of an owl. There were rascally dog traders and vendors of breast pads and doublets, all shouting their wares in every trick of the trade. And there, likewise, was Tile, always playing the clown. Tile said he would show people their faces in a glass, and he set up, inside his booth, a great wooden frame with a curtain behind it, as though it had been a mirror. Then a swarm of country folk crowded in, expecting a merry jest, when there came along a swaggering dandy, ready to part with his copper for the privilege of seeing his face. Tile himself popped up from behind the frame, posing with the same lordly air and tilt of his nose, and pretending to be the reflection of the dandy who stood before him. Then the people roared with laughter, for that Tile had showed that the fellow how ridiculous was his conceit. And Tile could frown like the ugliest Mr. Grimm. He could make the saucy face to match any village lass. He could look stupid as the stupidest yokel. He could draw down his mouth wholly like the premise better than thou. But when a sweet young maid came by, innocent and lovely, or a little old lady, wrinkled of face, but with the freshness of the spring in her heart, he would not show his own face at all, but would stick up in the frame a lovely bouquet of flowers. Thus he showed people their faces and their inmost hearts as well. And the crowd laughed and loved him and called him Tile Ulenspiegel, or Owly Glass. But though the people laughed, those were sad days in the country where Tile was born. Those were days when the Flanders and the lowlands were ground down beneath the heel of Spain. When the Emperor Charles V had a greedy eye turned ever toward the powerful merchant cities, those Dutchmen had more golden ducats than all of the grandees of Spain, than all of the princes of Germany, or the Indians of the New World. And Charles was determined to help himself, whenever he chose, to their treasures. But the sturdy Dutch cities were none too willing. They would not give up their ducats. They held their heads too high. They thought their own thoughts on government. They thought their own thoughts on religion. And in neither case did their thoughts agree in the least with those of the Emperor Charles. Bah! He vowed to make over, to suit his own will, the government and the religion of those stiff-necked Dutch burghers. Then many a good man or woman, yes, many a young lad or lassie, suffered dire punishment for daring to defy him. Now Tile was a valiant fellow. He spoke out his mind concerning the Emperor Charles. Tut tut! This was too bold of Tile. Before he knew it, the Emperor's henchmen had shut him up in the dungeon, and then packed him off to Rome, sternly commanding him not to return until after a year and a day. As Tile tramped sadly along the roads and pathways of the world, it chanced that he met a donkey, the beast, which was harnessed with leather and studs of brass, its head ornamented with tassels and plumes of scarlet wool, was prancing about a bit, and a crowd of old women stood around, telling each other what a dangerous monster he was. "This impish creature's bewitched," cried one. "Wasn't his master a wicked magician who vanished in a cloud of smoke? That ass is a danger to our town and all the people in it." "Alack!" cried a second old lady. "He kicks his hind legs, he brays in such fearful fashion. It is a shame and a pity that no man can be found to deliver the city from his sin." "If I were a man, I should have more courage," a third old lady cried. "I should go straight up and seize him by the bridle." But, notwithstanding all this brave talk, the donkey had only to kick up his heels and flick his sides with his tail and send the old woman running away with cackling cries of terror. "Only an angel could save us from a monster," they cried. Now, Ulenspiege could not help but laughing at the sight. "This bewitched beast," he said to himself, "is a sprightly ass, without a doubt, and a good goer. What if I were to take him for my own, and so save the distressed city?" Without another word, Tile got a feed of oats and offered them to the donkey. In enjoyment of these viands, the donkey grew as docile as a lamb, and permitted Tile to jump on his back and turn him first to the north and then to the east. While Tile had thus ridden off from the old dames a little way, he turned around, raised his cap in a courtly manner, and waved like a conqueror. The women, open-mouthed with amazement, fell on their knees before him, and that evening told in the town how an angel in a felt hat trimmed with pheasant's feathers had appeared to take away the magician's donkey and save the good people from him. Ulenspiegel went his way through the green fields, where cows grazed in their ease or lay resting in the sunshine. And the ass was a good ass, and Ulenspiegel called him Jeff. Thus it went day after day, and Jeff could eat thistles by the roadside, but Tile was often hungry. It seemed that his pockets had holes. Whenever he got a penny, alack, how soon it vanished. I don't know why it is, said Tile. That money doesn't like me. When I am so fond of money. At last his stomach, empty as a drum, came to the palace of the Landgrave of Hesse. Now Tile had learned how to paint from a strolling artist who came to the fairs where he played the clown, and he begged the Landgrave of Hesse to let him paint his portrait. And the Landgrave, who was a jelly prince, treated him to a meal like a wedding feast, and paid him 100 florins in advance to paint his portrait. With that of the Madame of Landgrave, and all their lords and ladies, their captains and officers of the state. The next day, Tile asked the Landgrave to let him see those persons whose likeness he was to paint. First, there was the Duke of Lundenburg, commander of the infantry of the Landgrave. He was so monstrously fat through stuffing himself with food that he waddled when he walked and looked like nothing so much as a goose. When you paint my portrait, he whispered to Ulenspiegel, see that you take off half of my fat. If you don't, I'll have you hung. Next came a noble lady, too lazy to stand erect, who had grown as stooped over and round sheltered as a monkey. Sir Painter, she said, unless you paint me straight and erect, I'll have you drawn and quartered. Third appeared a young maid of honor, fresh and fair, save that once she had got in a fight and lost 3 upper teeth. If you don't paint me smiling, she said, and showing a perfect set of teeth, I'll have you chopped up into bits. And so it went with all the court. At last, Tile was left alone with the Landgrave. My friend, said the Landgrave, let me warn you. If you do not paint each one of my courtiers exactly as he is, I will have your head cut off as if you were a chicken. Here's a fine to do, thought Tile. I'm to be drawn and quartered, chopped into small bits, and hung by the courtiers if I do not leave out their blemishes and paint them fair and handsome. And I'm to have my head cut off by the Landgrave if I do not paint them exactly as they are. I should do better to paint no portrait at all. So he had a curtain hung across the bare wall where he was to paint the picture. Then he shut himself up in the room with his 3 apprentices and considered the matter. Well, it was only secondly that he was a painter. First of all, he was a merry fellow who went through life praising the good and the beautiful and making sport of vanity and conceit. Here was conceit in plenty and no doubt whatever about it. It was plain that it was no job for a painter. It was a job for a clown. For 60 days hereafter, Tile and his apprentices remained in that room and were served with the best of the viands, but no one knew what they did, nor was anyone permitted to poke as much as the tip of their nose in the chamber. As time went on, the Landgrave grew more and more impatient. At last he commanded, "Show me the pictures at once." "Very well," answered Tom, "but pray have the kindness not to draw back the curtains until you have summoned the court." Soon, lords and ladies and captains all sat before the curtain, each eager to see his own face. But Ulenspiege said, "Ladies and gentlemen, behind this curtain I have painted to the best of my abilities all the beauty that I have seen in your faces. It will be quite easy for each of you to recognize yourself. But know this, all that are of noble blood shall behold my paintings and rejoice. But if there be among you any whose parents were poor or lowly, such an one will see nothing but a blank wall." With that, he drew back the curtain, and what was before the court save a bare, blank, empty wall? For Tile had spoken truly. All the beauty he had seen in the vain and selfish faces was nothing, and he had painted nothing. But who of the proud court was going to admit that he could not see the portraits? Who was going to let it appear that his family was poor and humble? They all made believe they could recognize the various faces and pointed themselves out to one another, though each was secretly ashamed because he saw nothing at all. And the fat old Duke of Luneburg was the biggest goose among them, for he insisted, more loudly than the rest, that he could see himself in the place of honor by the right hand side of his lord. Suddenly, the court jester jumped 3 feet in the air and jingled his bells. "Take me for a villain," he cried. "A low-born villainous villain. But I verily will affirm and assert and declare with trumpets and fanfares that here I see a wall, a blank white wall, and nothing but a wall, so help me God." At that, Tile took 3 strides toward the door, crying, "When fools begin a talking, 'tis time for wise men to be a walking." And he would have walked out of the palace in a hurry had he not the Landgrave stopped him. "Begone," he cried, "and never dare show your face in Hesse under the pain of instant death." Nevertheless, as he spoke, the Landgrave was secretly shaking with laughter at the joke. Tile had played on his vain and foolish courtiers, and unknown to all the rest, he slipped into Eulenspiegel's hand 15 golden florins. So Tile was off on his donkey, holding his head up high, the pheasant's feather in his cap wagging joyously in the breeze. He did not intend to return to Hesse. You may be sure of that. He knew too well what sort of welcome would greet him. But on his way home from Rome, he chanced all unwittingly to cross once again the borders of the fair land, and he lay down in the shade of the tree to take 40 winks, while Jeff begilded himself with thistles. As he slept, who should come along but the Landgrave himself, with a with a ratoon headed by the fat Duke of Ulenspiege. Tile awoke and found that the great goose loudly demanding, "Hang the villain at once." "Take him prisoner," said the Landgrave. Now Tile was in a tight place, but with his wits could what but his wits could save him. No man could avoid arrest in Hesse unless he fled to his home. There indeed was a safe, for the law of Hesse said that no man might be taken prisoner between the four posts of his home. But alack, should a poor fellow whose home was a donkey's back have four posts to flee to? Suddenly, Tile was struck with a bright idea. Seizing Jeff the donkey, he threw the donkey over on his back and sprang upon his belly, while the 4 feet of the overturned creature stuck straight up in the air about him. "I crave the law, my lord Landgrave," he cried. "The law?" thundered the Landgrave. "What law?" "You have defied my commandment and returned to Hesse. You are worthy to be hanged." "But," cried Tile, pointing solemnly to the 4 legs of the donkey. He stuck up absurdly around him. "You see, I am within the 4 posts of my home. And the law of Hesse says, no man shall be taken prisoner as long as he is between the 4 posts of his home." At this, the Duke of Ulenspiege began to rage. But the Landgrave burst out loud guffaws of laughter. And once again, Tile went free with a pocket full of florins. That brings us to the end of our first story. So the second story in the series of 6 of Tile Ulenspiege is Tile and Phillip II of Spain. So once again, if you've been watching all along, please hit the like and subscribe. Share this with anybody you're willing to share with, and help me please grow this channel so I can get some teeth back in my mouth. I would really appreciate that. The story 2, Tile and Phillip II of Spain. Now about this time, Philip Sourface, that is to say Philip II, son of the Emperor Charles, that was the 5th, came to visit his future states of Flanders, Brabant, Hainault, Holland, and Zeeland. His face was cold, his manners stiff, his gray eyes bitterly gloomy. While tournaments and joust feasts went on, he was never seen to laugh. And by what right, pray tell, was Philip the Spaniard, lord of Flemings and Dutchmen, lord of a race of so different from his? Ah, in those days, the land and all its people were but so much lifeless gold to be handed over as a wedding gift, with a bride to her new-wed bridegroom. Philip's great-granddaughter, Maximilian, Emperor of Austria and Germany, had been given the whole of Burgundy, which then included the Netherlands, along with his wife, Mary of Burgundy, and his grandfather, Philip the Handsome, had increased their immense possessions by acquiring the whole of Spain with his wife, Joanna, and the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabel. And it was due to marriages that Philip was the heir to such a vast kingdom. It was due to marriages that the Netherlands belonged to his father Charles V and would soon belong to him. At length, in his journeys, Philip came to Antwerp, where 23 triumphal arches had been erected to do him honor. The city expended hundreds and thousands of guilders on those arches and on the rich uniforms of lackeys, burghers, and merchants. There were to be seen the funniest of Dutch and Flemish jesters, and the Prince of Joy from Dordrecht riding on a pig, the King of Fools from Middelburg, who drove a horse by its tail, the fool's ship from down Limburg's way, full of funny fellows in calf skins or donkey skins, who played pranks and jokes with all kinds of innocent foolishness. But sober and gloomy Philip remained. He never once laughed nor smiled. At night came the Margrave of Antwerp, the burgomasters, the captain, and the deacons together to find someone who could make Philip laugh. Then was brought to them the news of the jester Tile, who by now had arrived in Hertogenbosch in the Duchy of Brabant. Post haste, they sent off for him in the hope that he could make Philip smile. Well, said Tile, scratching his head, if you want to amuse the king, I'll tell you what I will do. I will fly. So the feast heralds, mounted on beautiful horses covered with crimson velvet, rode through the streets, the marketplaces, and the squares of Antwerp, beating the drums and blowing their horns. Thus they announced that Ulenspiege, the fool of Hertogenbosch, was going to fly in the air at the quay in the presence of King Philip and his respectable, high, and noble court. That day, Ulenspiegel rode through the city on his donkey, which was led by a footman ringing a cowbell. Tile was dressed in a costly crimson silk garment, which the city council had given him, and for head covering he wore a crimson silk cap with 2 donkey ears, from each of which twinkled a little bell. At the pointed elbows of his sleeves, and from the top of his long pointed boots, likewise, hung golden bells. Now a magnificent dais had been erected on the quay for the king, and when Ulenspiegel arrived, he left his footman and his donkey in the street, and entered the house opposite the king's dais. He climbed through a window out onto a gutter. Then he sounded his little bells with merry glamour, and when everyone was still to watch him, he stretched out his arms wide as if he was going to fly. Every spectator held his breath, but just at that very moment, when they expected to behold him quite the gutter entirely launched himself into the air. What did Tile do? He did not fly at all. Audacious clown! He bent far over the edge of the house and cried to the king, Philip below, Hey, I thought that I was the only fool in Antwerp, but I see the city is full of fools. If you had told me that you were going to fly, I would not have believed you. But a fool tells you that he will fly, and you believe him? How can I fly? I have no wings. Some of the onlookers laughed, others were angry. But King Philip was stiff as a king of stone, and he never laughed nor smiled. It was not worth the trouble to prepare all the amusements for such a sour face as that, whispered the city councilors. So they gave Tile 3 guilders, and off he went from the city. And that brings us to the conclusion of our second story of Tile Ulenspiege. Our next stream will be number 16, and that will include number 3 and 4, which is Tile and the Emperor Charles. Ooh, remember, that's Charles V. That covers many, many pages here. Oh my God, I gotta sing. Wow, how many pages? So all of these stories, Tile covers over 65 pages of 6 stories. The 4th one will be the Siege of Leyden. So please tune back in soon, maybe tomorrow night, and we will get the 3rd and the 4th story of Tile Ulenspiege. See what else he comes up with. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you for watching. Again, please hit the like and subscribe. Share this with your family. Share this with friends. Help me grow this channel. Help me get some teeth back in my mouth. I really appreciate it. With that, I bid you adieu, a good night, and a farewell. Until next time, my friends. Have a wonderful evening.